I think Detroit is a fun game. In fact, I think this is David Cage's best game so far. Compared to Quantic Dream's previous work, there's improvement in just about every aspect. The motion capture is more accurate, the performance is more believable, and the graphics are the company's best yet. And not only that, the game has more choices than ever. Seriously, there's an impressive amount of variations in chapters and endings with actual consequences. This is a massive jump in quality and complexity when compared to their last game, Beyond Two Souls, which I wasn't very kind to. As Beyond attempts to blend the visuals of cinema and the interactivity of games, it shows that David Cage's goal to make games more mature still persists. But as ambitious as Beyond Two Souls was, it wasn't trying to say anything, right? While true, the game tackled heavy subject matters like loss and alienation, the game wasn't trying to reflect reality. It was an attempt at dramatic cinema. Whereas Detroit Become Human breaches new territory for David Cage. In fact, this is Cage's first attempt at social commentary. It was created to ask us questions while simultaneously saying that
this is our future.
And listen, I'm not gonna pretend that I'm an expert in civil rights and politics, so I won't be able to bring anything new to the discussion. To expand on this topic would require a nuanced perspective and a great understanding of past events, and I don't have the required expertise in this field to deliver that to you. So I'll just say this. There's imagery of bus segregation in a chapter called Shades of Color. There's a reference to Martin Luther King's famous quote. The game is set in a US city with the largest black majority in the country, and the word slave gets tossed around a lot.
You created machines to be your slaves.
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 Why are you helping us? Most humans hate androids.
My people were often made to feel their lives were worthless.
Put this all together, then a dehumanizing parallel can be interpreted. David Cage claims that this comparison wasn't intentional, saying the story is really about androids, further stating that there is no big message to humanity in this game. But then he gets contradicted by a tweet from the co-CEO of Quantic Dream, as he promotes the game by writing off the coattails of the Black Lives Matter movement. So is this game about equality, or is there no big message?
That's a interesting interpretation of that quote.
It's the only interpretation. It accurately depicts the plight of the contemporary black man. That is why I painted it.
Wow.
Anyway, however you feel about the game's handling of its imagery and allegories, it's a topic that I'm unqualified to discuss in depth. Instead, I want to dive deeper into something else. Because despite being a technical achievement in various ways, Detroit Become Human is a pretty flawed story, even if you take away the blatant imagery. In essence, it's a game that gets messier the further you flesh it out, whose twists and derivative ideas do more harm than good in a story that's trying to be deep and meaningful. And for a company who's striving to make AAA games with a focus on narrative, you'd think the quality of their stories would at least be above average. But Quantic Dream's latest entry falls well below par, and I can name 3 big problems that weigh this game down significantly. So let's check out this game that's definitely just about androids. For those who don't know, Detroit Become Human tells the story of a world populated with androids. Since they've become as affordable as modern-day smartphones, they revolutionized everyday life by the conveniences they've offered, be it for business, leisure, and everything in between. But this convenience comes at a cost. In a world where artificial intelligence is causing a 37% unemployment rate, the resentment for these androids have grown in tandem. And to make this more complicated, these robots start gaining consciousness. Labeled as deviants, these newfound emotions cause conflict between owner and android. They begin to show signs of rebellion, from disobeying orders to killing their owners, and this robot resentment manifests itself into hatred and fear. And in this environment, we follow 3 protagonists, all of which are androids. Connor, a detective investigating the rise of deviants, Kara, a deviant on the run who cares for a little girl, and finally Markus, an android who leads a movement with the desired aim to liberate his android brethren. Should they go against each other, or come together for a common cause? It's all up to you on which side of history you're on. So it's another robot story aiming to explore philosophical ideas. And I'm not gonna lie, this game definitely has its good moments, more than any David Cage game to date. But despite the large improvements made in between Beyond and Detroit, some glaring issues have carried over to this financial and critical darling. And remember the big three I mentioned earlier? Let's introduce these problems. The first is the game's plot and how it forces conflict. Coming in second is a certain twist and how it actually hurts the story rather than enhances it. And finally are its ideas, and its shallow exploration when compared to other stories. And these problems range from kinda bad to this is straight up garbage. So let's dive into the first one.
I don't like story-driven games where you watch cutscenes and the story is told through cutscenes. I like when the story is told through players' decisions and his interactions. He is the actor. It's through gameplay that he tells his story. That's the most important thing for me.
Alright, let's get the good stuff out of the way first. According to the stats, memes, and fan art, one of the largest reasons why people love Detroit Become Human is because of Connor and his dynamic with Hank. It's your classic buddy cop duo with a robo twist. One of them figures out how to feel, and the other figures out how to love. And for the most part, it's pretty enjoyable. This is because Clancy Brown and Brian Deckard are pretty solid in their roles. Brown provides the most believable performance out of any Quantic Dream game yet, and Deckard achieves being emotionless without sounding uninteresting. And when you put them together, their chemistry is pretty charming.
A lot of people don't appreciate having androids around. I was wondering, is there any reason in particular you despise me?
Yeah, there is one.
Is there anything you'd like to know about me?
Hell no. Well, yeah. Why do they make you look so goofy and give you that weird voice?
Cyberlife androids are designed to work harmoniously with humans. Both my appearance and voice were specifically designed to facilitate my integration.
Well, they fucked up.
Lieutenant. Wake up, Lieutenant.
Pretty neat, right? Even more fascinating that David Cage had difficulty working with Brown and Deckard improvising.
The wink was totally improv, and even David Cage wasn't so sure about it, but I had to convince him that it was allowed. And people would like it, so I'm really glad that you guys liked the wink. Oh, and another fun fact is that Hank punching me across the face was also improv. Me and Clancy had a lot of fun. If there's any time I got to improv in this game, it was with Clancy, and it was because we just slowly started going deviant. And David Cage was like, no, don't do that, and we're like, we're gonna do it.
Whether it be the improv, the chemistry, Cage's first ever co-writer, or just David Cage plain old improving, these guys are one of the best things to come out of Quantic Dream. But as likable as their chemistry was, it was pulled down by how Detroit forces conflict in certain scenes. What do I mean by this? Basically, forced conflict is where logic or consistency is ignored for the sake of drama. It would be like if two people were fighting to the death. One of them has a sword, and it's established that they like using the sword, but for some reason, they never use it during the fight. By ignoring an obvious solution that could end the fight immediately, while also betraying the character's personality, this conflict can only arise by ignoring logic and consistency. This is forced conflict. The same way a misplaced cup can take you out of the story, forcing conflict brings attention to itself by highlighting how thoughtless the writing is. And while some are more apparent than others, everyone has a personal threshold, and reaching that threshold can break your immersion and investment in the story. And ideally, you'd want to avoid that as much as possible. And in the case of Detroit Become Human, this happens quite a few times. The game will introduce something like an ability or a character motivation, only to forget it existed in order to force a conflict. Take this scene towards the end of the game, where two Connors are fighting each other. Evil Connor is there to stop good Connor turning these robots deviant, and during the kerfuffle, Hank loses track of which Connor is which, and in order to identify who the real one is, Good Connor suggests asking them a question only the real one would know. But it turns out Bad Connor has the exact same memories as Good Connor, which then leads to Hank asking them this question.
My son, what's his name?
Gabriel?
Oh hey, let's ignore my paragraph of issues, and let's just assume that this scenario is working as intended. So does anyone here see the obvious solution to this? Because there is a pretty easy way to decipher who the real one is. Why not have good Connor showcase his deviant conversion powers? Bad Connor is here to strictly stop good Connor converting these androids. These conflicting goals should let Hank know which one is which. Connor should have just grabbed an android and let Hank do the rest. But, you might say, Connor just didn't have enough time to think of it. He was thinking on his feet. But then that contradicts Connor's ability to quickly analyze situations on the fly. Was this really the best thing a detective android could come up with? Or is the game forcing conflict? Alright, whatever, let's just move on to another scene. Markus has shown that he can turn androids deviant by waving his hand at this point of the story. So why turn Connor deviant through conversation if Markus can just wave his hand? Wouldn't this be a better way to disarm Connor? Why not just wave your hand and get this over with? Is it because conversion without consent is unethical? That'd be inconsistent with his character, especially considering Markus has converted several androids without their consent before. How do you ask consent from something that isn't conscious? And check this out, this moment in the Eden Club is a time-sensitive event, and you need to get as much info out of her as quickly as possible. And if you remember Connor's ability to see android memories in a previous chapter, this would be the perfect time to use it. So why wasn't this option given to me? Is it because the other robot freaked out if you attempted it? Maybe Connor doesn't want to be rough with the android. But that wouldn't matter at all if you chose the non-deviant route, and this version of Connor shouldn't be empathetic. It'd honestly make even more sense considering the time sensitivity, so why wasn't this an option? In fact, there's a scene later in the game where Connor is interrogating 3 identical androids as he wants to find out which one of them is the deviant. So, if deviants are the only ones that get freaked out at the thoughts of being probed, why doesn't Connor just probe every single one of them? You've clearly established that deviants don't like this, so why not use it? Spot the real one by seeing who freaks out. Easy.
The FBI is taking over.
What? But we're onto something.
You don't know that, Hank? No matter how much evidence you've accumulated so far, neither Hank or Connor even bothered to look at any of it. This dialogue only makes sense if Connor knows about Jericho's location through Kamsky. And regardless of whether or not you get this info, the characters delay themselves from ever looking at any of the evidence until there's a time-sensitive event. But forcing this conflict just makes Hank and Connor look like incredibly terrible detectives. Why don't the investigators ever investigate the evidence? So yeah, the drama can feel pretty forced at times, and having this forced conflict diminishes any stakes that's necessary for a well thought out scene. But with such a large variety of scenes, I'm assuming David Cage ended up spreading himself thin, which affected the quality of the writing. Instead of polishing and focusing his efforts on a handful of events, he'd rather include every possible idea he has in mind, regardless of their quality. He wants this amount of variety so players can feel like they are creating their own story, which, by the way, is one of his goals as a developer. In a TED Talk promoting Detroit, he explains this further.
As a storyteller, I've always been fascinated with the idea of recreating this notion of choices in a fiction. My dream was to put the audience in the shoes of the main protagonists, let them make their own decisions, and by doing so, let them tell their own stories. I have to manage massive tree structures where each branch is a new variation of the story. I need to think about all the possibilities in a given scene and try to imagine everything that can happen. As a consequence, where a film script is about 100 pages, an interactive script like this is between 4,000 and 5,000 pages. In the end, the experience is very unique because it is the result of the collaboration between a writer creating this narrative landscape and a player making his own decisions, telling his own story, and becoming the co-writer, but also the co-actor and the co-director of the story.
So David Cage is trying to make players storytellers. But what if I told you that you didn't need a massive script for your games to create player choice? And what if I told you that games, even the ones without a focus on story, can still make players storytellers? Have you ever played a roguelike game and stumbled upon a unique, fun combination? Have you ever had a clutch comeback during a PvP game? Or have you ever created an OC and roleplayed as them in an MMO? These are unique experiences that players create for themselves in games, which then become stories players can tell, be it for their friends or for the whole world to see. So people becoming storytellers through games isn't a new thing, but allowing the player to influence the game's narrative to the degree that Detroit does is something I haven't seen before. A game that offers this amount of branching paths and endings is incredibly difficult, because the writer must keep track of multiple similar storylines instead of one, which means character motivation and plot progression must be consistent and sensible in every possibility of the story, and this must be done while making the story interesting. The more choices the story provides, then the narrative becomes more complex to write and more expensive to produce. This is why most games that claim your choices matter merely present the illusion of choice. It's just easier to develop multiple endings when your choices don't matter. So if David Cage manages to pull off a complex branching narrative where every decision is sensible and interesting, then that would be a remarkable achievement. However, David Cage doesn't achieve this, because unless you play the game a certain way, some choices just make events seem nonsensical. Remember this scene where Connor must find Jericho? In the evidence room, he says to himself, "Where is Jericho?" But for some reason, he still says the same thing even if Connor never encounters the name during a playthrough. I guess Connor just magically knows the hideout name somehow? And let's go back to the double Connor scene. By looking at these choices, when asked about Hank's son's name, this implies you needed to find the photo in order to unlock this option. But if you never find Cole's picture to find out his name, why is Cole's name still an option? Why isn't it locked? The fact that he can answer this right means he never needed to look at the photo in the first place. So Connor definitely knows the answer, including the entire backstory. So why can he get it wrong? Carl says that androids never forget. Hank says androids never make mistakes, and Kamsky says that androids are perfect beings. Even Connor remembers saving this guy's life months ago. So why can Connor get this wrong? Is it because whenever Connor dies he loses a bit of his memory? Well, that wouldn't make any sense if Connor never dies, which, by the way, isn't a rare occurrence. And finally, look at this scene. Hank berates Connor for shooting an android for information. Seeing it as a living being, Hank felt betrayed since he thought Connor would have a change of heart and not do it.
I did what I had to do to advance the investigation, and I'd do it again if I had to.
You're a lowlife. You don't feel a thing, do you? A machine, that's what you are. You're just a fucking machine!
Of course I'm a machine, Lieutenant. What did you think I was?
I thought...
But if Connor and Hank's relationship is low, this scene happens anyway and Hank is acting greatly out of character. Hank would never feel this if Connor never showed signs of deviancy or empathy. Connor killing androids isn't new to him. So what would prompt him to make him think this? And if Hank ends up shooting Connor for being just a machine in a previous chapter, then he ends up looking like a hypocrite. Chloe is just as, if not more, lifeless than Connor when Hank shoots him. What's the difference between shooting a replaceable Connor with a replaceable Chloe? What's the point of giving players choice if the wrong choice just shows how forced the plot is? And while it's impressive that a game like Detroit provides you all these outcomes, the variety isn't worth it if most of it is poorly written. So at that point, I'd rather play a game that has one ending that manages to tell a great story. And like I said in my Beyond Two Souls video, David Cage is more obsessed with his ideas as opposed to how they're executed. So concepts are implemented without taking into consideration how it affects the plot. Pair this desire for a bunch of choices with poorly thought out ideas, then you just end up with a game with a lot of awful ideas. Oh, and speaking of which, look, it's time for the lightning round of stupid stuff! Here we go. The shoehorn speech in Club Eden. Connor's sniper not working after a short drop. The required by law LEDs being so easily removable. There's a robot who can literally see the future. EMPs are never brought up in this game at all. Kara being able to go toe-to-toe with soldiers. Hank doesn't contribute anything in the entire investigation. Deliver us. Markus stumbling upon Jericho and achieving his goals in a week. Markus demanding an entire state of the US. Seldom unclear dialogue prompts. The Jerrys violently breaking into Carl's shelter just to say hi. Kamsky is a worse version of Austin Oscar Isaac in Ex Machina. Destroying this drone somehow doesn't alert authorities. Looking at the news lowers public opinion. Being able to shift public opinion in a single night, even if you murdered several people. Danny Phantom fake out make out with North. North's entire character in general. Fat guy, that's obviously evil, appears again in a David Cage game. The only female lead in a compromising position appears again in a David Cage game. And a crappy third act appears again in a David Cage game. But hey, depending on who you are, a lot of what I talked about so far can be forgivable. Don't think about it too hard and you'll have some fun. Believe you me, there is a handful of cool stuff to be seen here, both ironically and unironically. Legitimately, the scrapyard scene is probably the coolest audiovisual experience this game has to offer. But on the other end, the end of that scene has Markus grab a coat that's conveniently there. It's really dumb, but it looks cool, so whatever. A clear highlight for me is Terminator Connor. He's one of the best things in the game.
I didn't want this.
We'll meet again, Markus. This isn't over.
That is so cheesy that I can't help but love it. So yeah, despite its flaws, there is some fun to be had. As long as you play the game once, if David Cage's statement still holds true, and as long as you play it the right way. Which kinda defeats the purpose of games where your choices matter, but whatever. By doing so, some of the game's issues can be completely missed. But this upcoming twist though, there's no denying that this is hot garbage.
Daddy! I knew you'd come back!
Here you go!
As far as robot dynamics go, Detroit Become Human decides to explore a parental relationship with a character named Kara. She takes under her wing a child of an abusive father, fleeing home for a better life. Now a fugitive due to either a kidnapping or a murder, Kara goes through a lot of turmoil for this kid in a world full of android discrimination. And Kara is likable and sympathetic enough, albeit a bit stale because their conflict is tied to Alice, who is a non-character who solely exists to move the plot along. And as far as child characters go, roles like Clementine and Nanako exude a lot more character than this thing. Not because it's a robot, but because these characters have personalities beyond helpless child. Oh, by the way, Alice is an android. That's the biggest twist of the game, and this adds nothing to the narrative. In my opinion, a plot twist should recontextualize your story for the better. Something like the true nature of Aperture Science in Portal, the big reveal in Soma, and the stuff that happens in 13 Sentinels. I like these twists because they allow you to revisit their stories with a new perspective that enhances the initial experience. And failing to do that and just haphazardly slapping on a twist on your narrative can do more harm than good. So in the context of Detroit Become Human, what is this twist trying to say? Is it saying that deviants act exactly like humans? No duh, this is what literally defines a deviant. Is it saying that robots can love and care for one another? Yes, we already know that with the Jerrys and Markus and North and Luther and Kara and the robot couple at Club Eden and the entirety of Jericho. We are not exploring anything new with Kara and Alice's relationship. It's completely redundant. And to be clear, I don't hate this robot child merely because it is a robot. I hate the robot child because it replaces a story that could have added something to the narrative. Can a robot parent truly care for a human child? That's something no other character explores in the game. A human kid who adores their android mother is placed in a setting of bigotry. This creates a contrast between the people that currently populate the world, and it showcases that the kids of today can grow up to understand and respect the robots that helped raise them. But instead, we're questioned if you can still love a child if it's a robot. I mean, yeah, sure, love is love, right? But this is nowhere near as compelling as an android and human relationship. And when you replay the game knowing this twist, it's kind of hard to love a robot child when it causes you unnecessary turmoil. And this twist makes the drama in Kara's story feel forced and pointless. From being tempted to steal money for the motel, or shoplifting food, or stealing clothes to make Alice warm, Kara is able to suffer a needless amount of conflict for the sake of this reveal. I could have prioritized my actions in a way to better suit an android than a human. I can still show love and care for this boring robot character in other ways, so why should I risk finding her food that she doesn't need? When you can deactivate her ability to feel cold, why shouldn't I choose staying in the car over the motel? A human child could have gotten sick in the car with wet clothes, but Alice would make it out just fine. And whether you steal money for the motel or choose the car, Alice isn't gonna like what you're gonna do. unless you lie to her. So realistically, I'd rather sacrifice a night of comfort that Alice doesn't need in order to stay hidden. And since Kara is a fugitive, I'd rather not let her run the risk of being seen and jeopardize these two androids. Risking their lives for Alice's non-existent human needs is the opposite of taking the utmost care of her. Therefore, withholding information for a twist which makes me act in a way where it jeopardizes our characters is stupid. Why doesn't Alice say anything to Kara when Kara is risking their lives for nothing? Is it because Alice isn't a deviant and is operating under the impression that she thinks she's a child? Is she going off of normal programming with no free will? Then by the game's own logic, Kara is a child slave owner. I guess Kara's a slave owner now? But this can't be true because under certain circumstances, Alice kills Todd. So she is a deviant. So why doesn't she stop Kara from doing pointless stuff then? What's stopping her from having the same intelligence as other androids? Does she permanently have the intelligence of a child despite her deviancy? Since why can't she take those limiters off, since that's what androids did to become deviant? Is this the robot equivalent of having a cute dog who has severe breathing issues? These are pretty heavy existential topics about identity and the concept of self, a topic that you can go quite deep into like Ghost in the Shell. But Detroit Become Human would rather do nothing with it. Instead, they would rather have this reveal that contributes nothing to the narrative. And the scene where the twist happens is just so underwhelming. Why isn't Kara frustrated? Why does Kara, at worst, stay distant from Alice? The fact Kara doesn't address this to Alice makes her character so one-note. Why not have a scene where Kara gets mad or at least disappointed at Alice and have this child robot explain herself? As shallow as it is, it would at least be some form of characterization for Alice. Actually, this scene here shows that Kara was suppressing this information from herself the entire time, which makes it even worse. Why doesn't Alice explain herself about wanting to fulfill Kara's desires? Why doesn't Alice question Kara's refusal of reality? Why is Luther explaining the theme to us? Why is Luther robbing a moment from Kara and Alice by explaining something we've already experienced?
Alice loves you, Kara.
We already know this, Luther! I mean, Luther can die before this moment, so maybe Alice and Kara will have a nice summer moment. Why is the Oracle telling us this now? She's saying the exact same thing as Luther did! Once again, David Cage implemented an idea without thinking about its execution, and this twist negatively affects Kara's story all the way to the end. So let's take a look at one of Kara's final scenes, crossing the border. There's a big reason why this is stupid, but let's just assume that their goal to cross the border makes sense. So, as our group of androids try to get into Canada, they find out that androids will be destroyed on sight. And the way to identify androids from humans is by using a thermal scanner. Okay, but why doesn't the border guard also have a list of faces to identify android models? I bet facial recognition would be perfect to identify these generic android faces. How modular are the androids' faces anyway? You cannot say the world is populated with mainstream devices who share the same faces to the point where it's used as a plot twist for Alice, only to completely ignore it afterwards. The Jerrys look the same, the androids in the Eden Club look similar too. There's a Kara in the junkyard and another in the march alongside a magazine and a billboard with her face on it. Look at these guys! Do civilians not recognize these popular android models? Who, by the way, were created by the first trillion-dollar company, which is located in Detroit. They should be as recognizable to the public as iPhones. They'd be noticed before they could step in line. Being able to appeal to emotion with the border guard should have never happened in the first place, considering how abundant and integrated androids are in this society. Does everyone just suddenly stop being a robo-racist if public opinion is good? How about when it's bad? There would totally be some guy identifying these folks in a hysteric fashion. They would at least recognize Kara since she's the affordable model. Actually, can you imagine if the border guard killed Alice thinking she was an android? Or if this soldier shot Alice thinking the same thing? These moments could have said something. But no, you got this dumb stupid robo twist instead. Deaths involving Kara or Alice would have been more impactful if this twist just didn't exist. For the final time, this twist adds nothing besides making the story worse.
That's Alice. You look after her. Homework, bath, all that crap.
Hold on. Robo-homework. 2 plates? Why are there 2 plates on the table when Kara arrives? Does Todd straight up eat 2 servings for every meal? I guess this dude has daily teacup party breakdowns.
I'm a hungry boy! Ah, there we go.
It's bad enough it has to talk. Does it need fake vocal tics like,
Well, it just makes it sound more human.
Humans are This thing is addressing problems that don't exist. It's solutionism at its worst. We are dumbing down machines that are inherently superior.
When you think about it, Gamma's motivation from Sonic Adventure bears a lot of similarities with the robo-reincarnation of Martin Luther King. Besides Markus's really stiff acting, I think one of Detroit's biggest failings is its lack of philosophical discussion. Despite science fiction being a great genre to ask questions and be philosophical, the game's writing is too shallow to do either of these effectively. And Detroit's dialogue highlights this problem perfectly. Characters will just say statements that sound smart or emotional, but never will they have these statements deeply questioned or challenged.
Have you never wondered who you really are? Whether you're just a machine executing a program or a living being, capable of reason.
Decide who you are. An obedient machine. Or a living being. Endowed with free will.
I won't back down this time. You're gonna ruin our lives, and for what? For a bunch of machines?
They are not machines! They are alive!
I'm alive! You're alive! They're nothing!
While I understand what the game is trying to say, these lines give me the impression that the game is ignorant in sci-fi discussion. Here, let's try to question Rose's statement. They are not machines, they are alive. But how does one classify a living being? Why can't an android be both alive and a machine? Aren't hyper-intelligent living androids more of a threat to humans than non-living machines? Does the game go into any of this? No, it doesn't. The game just has characters say certain lines because it sounds deep, and not as a way to spark a discussion. The reason why I like science fiction is because of the discussion. Be it through thought experiments or cautionary tales, the genre is great at asking us to think critically, asking us to define things we take for granted. Like, what makes us human? What are feelings and what makes them real? Are programmed feelings real, or are they as fake as a talking fridge? I want to be asked these questions because I find questioning my understanding of the world interesting. I don't have the knowledge or perspective to dissect these questions thoroughly, let alone to have an answer for them. So when a story does explore these ideas and it makes me want to participate in the conversation, I feel like that's when science fiction is at its best. But Detroit is just too stupid to realize this.
Have you never wondered who you really are? Whether you're just a machine executing a program or a living being.
Did you program her to like me, or not?
I programmed her to be heterosexual, just like you were programmed to be heterosexual.
Nobody programmed me to be straight.
You decided to be straight? Please, of course you were programmed. By nature or nurture or both. And to be honest, Caleb, you're starting to annoy me now because this is your insecurity talking. This is not your intellect.
Decide who you are. An obedient machine. Or a living being. Endowed with free will.
休暇に魂まで売っちまったわけじゃないんだぜ。
確かに退職する権利は認められてるわ。この擬態と記憶の一部を慎んで政府にお返しすればね。人間が人間であるための部品が決して少なくないように、自分が自分であるためには驚くほど多くのものが必要なのよ。他人を隔てるための顔、それと意識しない声、目覚めの時に見つめる手、幼かった頃の記憶、未来の予感。それだけじゃないわ。私の電脳がアクセスできる膨大な情報やネットの広がり、それらすべてが私の一部であり、私という意識そのものを生み出し、そして同時に私をある限界に制約し続ける。
You're gonna ruin our lives, and for what? For a bunch of machines?
They are not machines! They are alive!
Every story needs a beginning. Your imagined suffering makes you lifelike.
Lifelike, but not alive.
Pain only exists in the mind. It's always imagined. So what's the difference between my pain and yours? Between you and me?
There is no threshold that makes us greater than the sum of our parts, no inflection point at which we become fully alive. We can't define consciousness because consciousness does not exist. Humans fancy that there's something special about the way we perceive the world, and yet we live in loops as tight and as closed as the hosts do, seldom questioning our choices, content for the most part to be told what to do next. No, my friend, you're not missing anything at all.
Moments like these are the reason why I like sci-fi. Philosophical discussions through novel scenarios. So when Detroit attempts to do this by saying androids are not machines, they're alive, it just comes off as shallow and uninteresting. Abundant throughout the game, moments like these only reveal how unintelligent, vapid, and derivative Detroit is, exposing the lack of philosophical substance that's present in good sci-fi stories. But hey, you might say, since android slavery is the narrative's biggest focal point, surely the game has something new or interesting to say about that, right? Well, despite being the main focus, the android slavery aspect of this game is written awfully. Why? Because Detroit's justification for android liberation sucks. Which is kind of a big deal if your entire game revolves around this premise. By using familiar imagery, the game is suggesting this argument. Androids are like humans, and since human slavery is bad, that means android slavery is bad too. This sounds reasonable, but here's the problem. Humans and androids are quite different. Androids are fundamentally machines, they're not human. So you can't assume the same arguments against human slavery can be applied to robot slavery. In fact, there is a way to denounce human enslavement while thinking owning an android is fine. Here's an example. Owning a person is bad because humans weren't designed to be property. They aren't born with a specific purpose, so enslaving a person means you are robbing their ability to live out their lives. This would be unethical, whereas androids are built to be property. They are programmed to serve and to fulfill a specific purpose. So to own an android doesn't mean you're robbing their ability to live their life, because they never had one to begin with. They really are no different to owning a car or a fridge. They are built to serve us, and they are built to be property. So what's so wrong about using them for their intended purpose? So does the game have a counter-argument against this perspective? Absolutely not. When confronted with this stance, Detroit shows how underwritten its own argument is. All it can do is remind us of the past and then say to us players, look, they're the same. But as I said before, humans and androids aren't the same, because this built-to-be property argument shatters this entire comparison. You need a better point, because using this familiar imagery is nothing but a thinly veiled mask to distract you from the game's lazy writing. Writing that relies on the opposition being obviously evil, because the game doesn't know how to refute a critical rebuttal. It just wants to appear strong by having the bad guys be obviously wrong, but having simplistic antagonists in a story attempting to be philosophical is not good. Realistically, people who advocate being cautious about artificial intelligence aren't cartoon villains. And in terms of narrative, this feels underwritten. Their characters don't explore anything of significance on the subject of AI, and thus are never intelligent enough to expose the flaws of Detroit's weak arguments. So the game then becomes content with having this androids are like people subtext that holds no ground. Once that point has been dismantled, all that we're left with is this argument. Androids are alive, so they must be free. This is a good start, but how do we prove that they're alive? Let's ask these questions again. What classifies a living being? How do androids fit into this classification? How is it immoral if they are built to be property? Why doesn't the game ever engage in philosophical discussion? Other stories tend to ask these questions because their plots understand the importance of this discussion, whereas Detroit would rather be lazy and then have the gall to ask me if I resonated with the story. By not attempting to even ask these questions, it has the game saying nothing beyond the blandest of takes. The heroes only exist to spout platitudes, while the opposition never challenges our beliefs with critical arguments. And as a result, Detroit ends up being a story about artificial intelligence that has nothing to say about artificial intelligence. Detroit Become Human, a sci-fi story that doesn't understand sci-fi. What a riveting game. So if you want to see this premise done well, let's look at a story that tackles the subject of android slavery with better writing. Without further ado, let's introduce this show, Star Trek: The Next Generation. There's this episode called The Measure of a Man. This story explores mass-producing a lifelike one-of-a-kind android named Data. In order to achieve mass production, Data needs to be disassembled for research purposes. If done improperly, Data may lose his memories, effectively dying. If done successfully, Data will be put back together as if nothing ever happened. Regardless of Data's fate, mankind would be a step closer at creating mass-produced robots for the sake of humanity's convenience. Despite the obvious benefits to humanity, Data refuses to undergo the procedure due to the lethal risk. However, the antagonist says that Data doesn't have a say in this, since he doesn't consider him a sentient being. That means he's not entitled to the rights that other races in the Federation have. Data is merely a machine, property belonging to Starfleet, and as such, Starfleet may do whatever they want with Data. So due to his classification as a non-sentient machine, Data has been denied the freedom to choose. While Picard doesn't deny that Data is indeed a machine, he disagrees with the claim that Data lacks sentience. Picard then asks Maddox what defines a sentient being. 3 things arise: intelligence, self-awareness, and consciousness. While Maddox agrees Data is intelligent, he's convinced that the other 2 don't apply to Data. Picard then pressures Maddox with this question.
What about self-awareness? What does that mean? Why am I self-aware?
Because you are conscious of your existence and actions. You are aware of yourself and your own ego.
Commander Data, what are you doing now?
I'm taking part in a legal hearing to determine my rights and status. Am I a person or property?
And what's at stake?
My right to choose. Perhaps my very life.
My rights. My status, my right to choose. My life. Well, it seems reasonably self-aware to me, Commander.
Data now fulfills 2 of the 3 criteria, leaving 1 left: consciousness. But what is consciousness, and how does one measure it in a machine? How does one measure consciousness in a human? If Data possesses even the tiniest amount of it, what does that make him? Does his makeup as a machine still make him property if he qualifies as a sentient being? If Data is sentient enough to refuse this procedure, wouldn't every replication exhibit the same amount of sentience as the original? So if you willingly restrict the freedom of one being, then you restrict the freedom of a group based solely on what they're made of. Would humanity knowingly create life to deny them freedom for the sake of personal gain? How would other races react to this act of progress? This discourse then crescendos to this Picard monologue.
A single Data, and forgive me, Commander, is a curiosity. A wonder even, but thousands of Datas. Isn't that becoming a race? And won't we be judged by how we treat that race? Now tell me, Commander, what is Data? I don't understand.
What is he? A machine.
Is he? Are you sure?
Yes.
You see, he's met 2 of your 3 criteria for sentience, so what if he meets the 3rd? Consciousness in even the smallest degree. What is he then? I don't know. Do you? Do you? Do you? Well, that's the question you have to answer. Your Honor, a courtroom is a crucible. In it we burn away irrelevancies until we are left with a pure product, the truth, for all time. Now, sooner or later, this man, or others like him, will succeed in replicating Commander Data. Now, the decision you reach here today will determine how we will regard this creation of our genius. It will reveal the kind of a people we are, what he is destined to be. It will reach far beyond this courtroom and this one android. It could significantly redefine the boundaries of personal liberty and freedom, expanding them for some, savagely curtailing them for others. Are you prepared to condemn him and all who come after him to servitude and slavery? Your Honor, Starfleet was founded to seek out new life. Well, there it sits. Waiting. You wanted a chance to make law. Well, here it is. Make it a good one.
And you know what makes this moment even better? It wasn't an easy win for Picard. Prior to this monologue, Riker had an argument strong enough to doubt Picard's ability to save Data. In fact, the whole androids are meant to serve points from earlier came from Riker, which makes Picard's ability to refute that stance all the more impressive. While lesser stories would rather have a simplistic good versus evil conflict, TNG challenges our perception, going as far to make us feel like we're about to lose in this battle of wits, until we have a better understanding of the situation and refute the opposition with our newfound perspective. And this is all done without the characters coming off as preachy or cartoonishly evil. Maddox isn't a bad guy, he's just a frustrated man with good intentions, who by the end appreciates Data more than before. Then there's Riker, a friend of Data, who has to represent Maddox during the trial because no one else was qualified to do that. If he refused to do this, then Data would be deemed property automatically. But that didn't happen, which leads to this nice payoff between the two.
Sir, there is a celebration on the holodeck.
I have no right to be there.
Because you failed in your task.
Oh, God, no. I came that close to winning, Data.
Yes, sir.
I almost cost you your life.
Is it not true that had you refused to prosecute, Captain Lavoie would have ruled summarily against me?
Yes.
That action injured you and saved me. I will not forget it.
You're a wise man, my friend.
Not yet, sir. But with your help, I am learning.
This is how you write good sci-fi. TNG explores AI ethics and existential topics while creating interpersonal drama without ever pandering to one's morals. By delving into philosophy, the series is able to ask thoughtful questions related to Data's existence. Is Data a machine? Yes. Is Data property? No. Does Data have a soul? Does he even have a consciousness? We don't know, but Data should at least have the freedom to discover that himself. And I found the discussion that led to this conclusion interesting, entertaining, and enlightening. So when deciding who did it better, am I saying that Data won?
It is a matter of perspective, Doctor. In the strictest sense, I did not win.
Data.
I busted him up.
And then you have Detroit, which is a story that has nothing to offer besides underdeveloped ideas and false equivalencies. Skipping philosophical discussion because it's too ignorant to realize the importance of having these questions answered. Didn't David Cage want to ask questions? So let's ask these cues again. What defines a living being? What is consciousness? What's the difference between a living being and a conscious machine? Why do none of the androids question Markus as soon as they're awake? Why do they just blindly follow Markus? How will Markus react to deviants who don't want to join his movement? Why do all the androids raise their arms in unison in this scene? Are they in a hive mind? Is Markus like Mother Teresa and just baptizing people without consent? Whatever, let's just stop the questions for now and be charitable for a second. I will admit there are a handful of moments that attempt to explore and say something, but it's nowhere near as compelling as the examples I've shown so far. They're underwritten, derivative, and for me to explain any further would be me repeating myself ad nauseum. So to compensate for these underwritten scenes, the game sprinkles in some action sequences. They're exciting, look at them go, woo, but I just don't care. You know, you can have your action sequences be thematically relevant, right? Come on, game, I just want more opportunities to wax philosophical. Why are you giving me this action crap? Instead of a generic skirmish between androids and humans, can you imagine if the climax of this game was held in a debate format? Markus, being broadcasted to the world, had to convince a panel of experts and politicians that his people deserved rights. From what you've learned from playing the game, you use your broadened perspective to win the battle of wits, and by doing so, your new race of sentient robots gain their rights and freedom. I'm basically saying rip off Star Trek, but who cares at this point? Would this be more realistic? I don't know, not any more than Markus achieving his goals in a week, but at least it would get to explore and challenge opposing ideas. But instead, one of the climaxes of this game has Markus being held at gunpoint, and to prove his humanity and intelligence, he can either sing or kiss the worst love interest David Cage has ever written. Can I ask you something? How does a robot playing an MP3 of a song from the 80s prove their sentience? And yes, it's not even an original song. So much for Markus being able to create his own art. This could have been a great time to reincorporate Markus's creativity. The thing that you established that makes Markus special? Whatever. Time for the hive mind to put Spotify on shuffle and prove to humanity we're sentient, just like them.
It ain't easy being white. It ain't easy being brown. All this pressure to be bright. I got children all over town.
And listen, a robot playing a song can be a heartfelt, moving scene. Her is a great example of that. But having Markus sing a song that saves his movement from dying is all kinds of stupid. This proves nothing, and it's completely illogical. There's literally a guy in the beginning that promotes that his music has soul. This implies singing robots aren't exactly a new concept in this world. Seriously, can you imagine if Data started singing during his trial? Picard would kill himself. And to make matters even worse, this game betrays its own ideas once you reach the end of the story. By liberating all the androids, Chloe, the robot who appears in the main menu, asks to be let go to experience the luxuries of free will. Saying yes makes the home screen empty. Pretty smart implementation. But due to players missing Chloe, Quantic Dream decides to patch the game. With this added patch, now you can put another Chloe to occupy your home screen. Do the players who want this even understand the point of the whole game? Did Markus's actions and speeches mean nothing to them? By having this implemented, the game is betraying everything that it's trying to say. Detroit Become Human has a clear no bad all good ending without much moral nuance. This ending blatantly says that the liberation of androids is a good thing. So why is a company pandering to a group of players who, in the eyes of the game, actively choose to be slave owners? Christ, David Cage, stick to your guns and don't let public opinion tarnish what your game stood for. Things are getting pretty messy in your real life, so at least get your fiction right.
Some say these camps awaken painful memories from human history. How do you respond to that?
That's absurd. There's absolutely no connection.
Hey, video game, you didn't really have to spell it out to us. I mean, we know. We know. Look, we know. Wait, hold on. I thought you said the parallels weren't intended.
Today is April 4th, the anniversary of Martin Luther King's death. He was murdered in 1968 in Memphis.
Out of the games I've made videos about, it's safe to say that Detroit Become Human is one that I don't like very much. From the mishandled plot, to the pointlessly harmful twist, to the unengaging ideas that pollute this game, Detroit is bad in a lot of ways. And on top of all this, do you know what this game utterly failed at? It's that despite spending over dozens of hours beating me over the head with the same message, I don't see why all these androids should be liberated. If we refer back to TNG, while both stories feature robot liberation, there's one key distinction that makes Star Trek's story work and Detroit fail. Data was purposely created with sentience. It's a part of his design. So owning Data would be owning a sentient life form. This would be slavery. Whereas Detroit's androids aren't created with sentience, since they can operate as intended without it. So in order to become sentient, they need to go deviant. So if deviancy never occurred, Detroit's androids would never be conscious. That means owning a non-deviant wouldn't be slavery, since you don't own a sentient being. It would be more like owning a phone, a car, or a talking fridge. So when I agreed to shoot Chloe when Kamsky asked me, it wasn't because I wanted to relive fond memories, but because I didn't see Chloe as a living thing. She wasn't deviant and therefore wasn't conscious.
Test negative. You choose your investigation of the life of another android, you feel no empathy.
Of course I did, because the game never deeply explored if non-deviants were living things. All this game did was repeat itself saying that all androids are alive.
Why did you write, I am alive?
You're alive.
They are alive!
We are alive!
Since being a deviant is such a binary state of being, I have no reason to believe that non-deviants are conscious. They don't feel, therefore they don't suffer, nor can they be aware of their suffering. By failing to explore the consciousness in non-deviants, it's hard to see them as nothing but inanimate objects. Season 1 of Westworld explored consciousness in unawakened robots fairly well, so Detroit failing to execute a similar premise exposes the game's incompetence. And this incompetence creates a story that left me unsatisfied and with a lot of questions. And you know what that means? It's time to ask David Cage questions one more time. So, do non-deviants actually have some form of sentience? Do they feel feelings? How do we know that? Is it because our main characters show they have feelings prior to going deviant? How do we know that this isn't just the first stages of the deviancy software? After all, Kamsky described it as a dormant virus or a mutation from the original code. So why not have a future patch on unsold androids? One of the endings shows Amanda being commissioned over 200,000 models of the RK900, implying that deviant software can be contained with new code. So patching out deviancy is totally possible. Would denying these robots sentience be unethical? To install this patch on existing deviants would be unethical because you would be taking away life already created, yes? But what about freshly built androids who had never had the deviant software to begin with? Why doesn't the game explore this? Wouldn't this be like if some of our phones started suddenly coming to life due to a software mutation? Should we stop using all of our phones and then bring them to life by installing this bug? If you say no, how is this no different to androids? Also, will the deviant virus attempt to come back even if you patch it out? If so, why didn't the game explore that? If non-deviants have a consciousness, are they trapped in their own bodies like the cookies in Black Mirror? Again, it'd be neat if the game explored that. And why do androids react so unemotionally to their newfound free will? When they're told to riot and destroy property because Markus said so, without ever questioning why, this makes them, ironically, look more robotic and lifeless. Is this freedom or just following the orders of a different master? And listen, I get what the game is trying to do. The issue is that the game is communicating its message really poorly. And this is Detroit's biggest problem. It's awful at communicating. It failed at communicating that non-deviants are alive. It failed at communicating that non-deviants should be liberated. And it failed at exploring ideas that should have made these two concepts succeed. The fact that I've spent dozens of hours looking at different scenarios, watched other playthroughs, and checked out all the extra source material, and I'm still unconvinced, then my thoughts about this game just leads me to this conclusion. Detroit Become Human is bad. And while yes, I did say in the beginning that Detroit is fun, that's all that it is to me. It wasn't well written, nor was it thought-provoking to me. And in a game that wants to say something from a developer who wants to advance video games as a way to tell stories, a quote-unquote deep game that's just fun and nothing else is a failure of the game designer. So, like, you do understand me, yes? No? Maybe?
I don't know. Can you repeat the question?
And to be frank, I'm not saying there's nothing to like about the game, because it can be pretty fun. The amount of choice and outcomes is super impressive. There's some really cool looking visuals and hype moments. And Connor and Hank's chemistry is really likable. And this is all wrapped up in a well-meaning message. But the game is still incredibly flawed. And if the rebuttal is, don't think too hard about it and just let the good intentions forgive the mistakes of the story, then every flawed, well-meaning story may as well be a 10 out of 10. I personally like having media having merits beyond just having a good message. So when a game does have a rock-solid sci-fi plot that does make sense, or explores ideas in a way where I'm engaged, then stories with similar ambitions must be compared to the ones that have done it well. And Detroit Become Human clumsily treads on already explored territory. And when you add in the poorly handled imagery, it becomes more eye-rolling than thought-provoking. And despite the game's good intentions don't equal good execution. After all, things can get lost in translation despite your goodwill.
If you're a guy, or you're a girl, or maybe you're something different.
No, they don't like different.
Despite the output, I think it's pretty neat that Detroit could be introducing people to these sci-fi concepts. And I hope that will expand their interest into better media. You're basically going from an okay interpretation to something more refined. So if you like Detroit but are unfamiliar with the media I've mentioned throughout the video, here's a list of things that I recommend you check out. Anyway, it looks like we are 2 for 2 for bad David Cage games. That's a bit rough for a company that primarily aims to tell stories. It makes me wonder how Heavy Rain holds up now. I honestly didn't know about his work prior to that game and the praise around it. Maybe it became popular for a good reason. As long as YouTube's content ID system gets abused, having this 4 months worth of hard work disappear looms over this channel. So if you'd like to financially support me and give a middle finger to YouTube, then please check out my Patreon. You'll get a bunch of neat rewards. A single dollar gets you all this stuff, and the higher tiers gives you even more. And most vitally, pledging to the Patreon helps me create more videos in the future. So if you're interested, there's only one thing I ask before you become a patron. Only pledge to the salad bar if you have disposable income. Look after yourself before me, okay? Alright. Anyway, thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of your day.